Hi, this is Travis. I work for Kaiser, and today we're talking about performance contracting for operating rooms. This is a rehearsal for a presentation I'm going to give in January in Chicago 2018. So first I want to acknowledge the co-authors here, Jessica and Nabil, who also worked on this. Then this is a brief agenda of what we're going to see during the talk. Of course, it ends with success. And this is an example of a modular operating room ceiling. Right now there's about a dozen vendors on the marketplace that offer this. It's pre-coordinated, gets built in a factory, then it gets brought out to the field and assembled and lifted into place. So in this version you can see them sort of lifting the operating room ceiling up in sections. And in this version you can see them lifting the operating room ceiling sort of all at once. In that third and fourth picture there. It's pretty amazing construction technology. They put it together on the floor, then literally in a day, in an afternoon, they lift it into place, secure it, and it's all pretty well done, and then sort of finish out the rest of the room around that. Pretty nice tech. And just to kind of jump to the end of the story here, these are the results of one of these rooms. The room that you saw in the picture was the first one that we did, OR number 9. And this is the certification of that room. So it all tests out at an ISO 6 particle count and microbial counts below 10 colony forming units. And then we also have this recovery test that we do. So we're getting results out of this. Pretty cool. But the story I want to tell you is about the bid that we did. So we're building a lot. We have about 50 operating rooms in various stages of design and construction right now. So we wanted a national set of vendors that our folks could do business with. And we wanted some national pricing on a standard set of products and services. So we started off with, I think, about 12 to 15 vendors. A lot of the projects that we do are in California, where we have some unique structural requirements. So we shortlisted down to 5 vendors in our RFP, and then we got those RFPs, scored the proposals, and got it down to 3 vendors. We brought those 3 vendors in for interviews. And that's where the story kind of gets fun. The day of the interview, those guys came in, and here's how that day went. First guy walks in, and he's set up, and he says, my system provides clean air at the OR table. Here's all the details of my system, and here's my fancy CFD models that show that my system provides clean air at the table. Don't believe those other guys. They're selling lies and trickery. My system is the one that provides the real clean air at the table. And then he packed up his stuff, and he left. And the second vendor walked in, and he set up, and he said, my system provides clean air at the operating room table. Here's the details of my system, and here's my fancy CFD models that show my system providing clean air at the table. Don't believe those other guys. They're selling trickery and lies. My system is the one that provides the real clean air at the table. And then he packed up his stuff, and he left. And the third vendor walked in and set up and said, my system provides clean air at the operating room table. Here's the details of my system, and here's my fancy CFD models that show my system providing clean air at the table. Don't believe those other guys. They're selling trickery and lies. My system is the one that provides the real clean air at the table. And then he packed up and left. And after that, and I'm abbreviating, by the way, that took about 4 hours. But after that, my boss looked at me and he said, I don't know what to believe. I know I don't ever want to see another CFD model as long as I live. We can negotiate price, but you need to figure out how to compete these guys on some actual measure of quality. And he left. And that left me talking to my national contracts manager. Now, I don't know what your guys' national contracts managers are like, but my national contracts manager, hardened contractor, shiver in fear at the rumor of my national contracts manager. And for breakfast, my national contracts manager eats the souls of the vendors who fail to meet their terms and conditions. And so I'm in the room with my national contract manager, and she looks at me and she says, hey, can we make this a performance contract? Can we just make them, guarantee performance in the final deliverable? And so I said, yeah, sure, actually, because that's what the Germans do. The Germans do that in their code. In Germany, every operating room has to pass a performance test. And actually, that's what the British do in their code, too. In the UK, every operating room has to pass a performance test before you start it up. And the French do it, too. So yeah, of course we can do that. And she said, great, write it up. So I went back to my desk to write it up. And then that's when the story gets a little more fun. Because as you can see, the Germans are using this 3500 half micron particle per cubic meter, and the French are using an ISO class and a microbial class, and the British are just using microbials. They're all different. They're all different metrics. They're all different levels of clean. So, what am I going to write up? So then let's do theory. In theory, the cleanliness of the air in the operating room mitigates the risk of surgical site infections, right? Particles in the air can fall into the surgical wound and cause an infection, so fewer particles equals fewer infections, right? However, if you go to the scientific literature to find like the slope of the line between air cleanliness and surgical site infection rates, you're never going to find that. It's not like particle count X produces infection rate Y. We actually have no idea what that relationship is. We do not have a preponderance of evidence that the correlation really exists, and we don't know what the limits are. It would take multiple well-controlled studies to know that, and we just don't have it. The studies that we have are even hard to compare to each other. There's a big debate in Europe about the pros and cons of microbial testing and particle testing. In theory, we're trying to prevent particles from falling out of the air and causing infections, but inert particles don't cause infections. They have to be microbes. And even then, not all microbes cause infections. Some are perfectly healthy. So you're looking for like a subset of a subset. And if you measure the whole group of particles, then you may or may not be effectively measuring the subset of infection-causing microbes. Now, practically speaking, particles are a whole lot easier to measure. Optical particle counters are pretty standard. There are a bunch of them on the market. Most industrial hygienists have them. And the feedback is more or less instantaneous. You take a sample, look at the screen, there's your particle count. Boom. Microbial counts, on the other hand, are tougher. There's different sampling methodologies. So how do you compare the different sampling methodologies? You could do settling plates or extractors. Either way, you have to send them to a lab to incubate. You get results, but it takes about a week. So you can do particle counts right now. That'll tell you if your filters are working and if everything's going well. But it really won't tell you about microbial contamination. What the French did, and actually what we're seeing in USP, in pharmaceuticals 797, is they doubled down and did both a particle count metric and a microbial count metric. So we doubled down. We did both. I picked ISO 6 and 10 colony forming units per meter cubed. As near as we can tell, the typical U.S. operating room that meets code, an ASHRAE 170, is probably an ISO 7, probably. That's if you don't put HEPAs in. So I picked ISO 6 because I wanted it to be a little better than that. But I didn't want to stretch the market too far or add a whole bunch of costs. For purposes of practicality, we decided to do our tests at rest rather than occupied. In the UK, they test during operations, multiple operations. I didn't think that was going to fly. Some people have proposed doing mock procedures where you put a team in the room and they cut up and burn steaks while you take the measurement. But I was worried about repeatability of that, so we didn't quite go there. You could ask the question, how do you know that ISO 6 is the right number to assure protection against surgical site infections? The answer is I don't. I have no idea. I don't think anybody on the planet knows that. But I had to pick a number. That's the one that I picked. And what I will say is that these last 3 slides that I've shown you here are exactly the slides that I showed to our infection control peer group. Our hospitals have an infection control directors. Our states that we do business in, our regions have infection control directors, and they have this monthly national infection control peer group. So I showed all this to them, including the ISO 6 and the 10 CFU thing. And they said, yeah, sure. I didn't get any objections. And look, our infection preventionists like the idea of measurement and validation. They got it, or at least in the room that I was presenting to, they get it that air changes and pressures don't really tell you what the contamination is. So they were more happy to see it move into a measured direction. One of our infection preventionists wound up co-writing a paper in the Infection Control Journal advocating kind of this type of thing. But that's a different story. Let's go back to talking about contracts. So I went back to my contracts manager, if you remember her, and said, here's what we're going to put in the contract. Here's the language. We called the vendors, and there was shouting and cursing and deliberations and negotiations and all that fun stuff. And in the end, the 2 vendors signed national pricing agreements with these performance assurances in there. So you can see ISO class 6, that 3rd bullet point, and also the 10 CFU per meter cubed was a performance assurance that we put into the contract. Oh, there's more. We also put a 10-year warranty period into the contract. The vendor gives us a set of maintenance instructions, and then they warranty the performance of the ceiling system to hit that level of cleanliness for 10 years. That's in the contract too. Then we went out and did the first job, and in doing the first job was where we worked out the actual testing protocols. So I'm going to show you 3 slides of this. This is the testing protocols that we use. This one right here, you see some prerequisites for the testing. There's actually 4 tests that we do: particle counts, and then the filter leak test, and then the microbials, and then the recovery test. So here's for the particle counting. We actually set up some minimum testing locations there. There's a filter leak test. There's actually a standard for filter leak testing, and so we're citing that. Here's our sampling and microbial testing. And then so this is kind of the bonus one. We asked for this recovery test. In these ORs, I think like a lot of HVAC people, we like to turn down the systems at night. And so this recovery test really answers the question, okay, how long does it take to get back to clean and hit the ISO spec? And by the way, this one has surprised me. I always had in my head that it was about 30 minutes, that if you turn down the system at night and turn it back on in the morning, you should allow 30 minutes. But it's really quite fast, more like 11 minutes. One of them was as fast as 3 minutes, but it's pretty quick. And you've already seen this, the testing results from the first job. Our first job was operating room number 9 at the Ontario Medical Center. But we've since tested, we're getting near 20 operating rooms that we've actually sent through this certification process, meeting ISO 6 pretty soundly, often ISO 5. We have seen rooms fail on microbials, and so it's good to go back and do a cleaning before you do the testing in order to pass that CFU. Air is not the only thing that leads to a clean room. You actually have to have a clean room. And so this is a national standard for us. And I think, heck, I'm going to go ahead and say that we're the first healthcare provider in the United States to performance test our operating rooms. So we're proud of that. Internally, we gave the design team who did this first project an award. They got it done on time, on budget, and it has proven results, which is pretty cool. There's the actual name of the paper if you want to look this paper up later. And there's my contact information. Thanks.